In the first two meditations, Descartes does not use very much technical terminology. Right? He writes in a relatively plain style. The ideas might be complicated, but the way that he expresses them isn't very complicated, and we didn't need to spend a lot of time thinking about what particular words mean or how to interpret some of Descartes' phrases within the context of 17th century thought, and so on. But that's going to change here in the third meditation. In the third meditation, we suddenly see a lot of philosophical vocabulary on display. We suddenly hear Descartes speaking much more like a professional philosopher maybe than he used to. So what I want to do in this first video is to talk you through some of these concepts, terms, ideas, giving us the framework that we need to understand what Descartes is doing in the third meditation and later on. And the place where I would like to start is with Descartes' ontology. Ontology. Strictly speaking, that would mean the study of being. And that's really what it is. Somebody's ontology is the way that they conceive of sort of the basic structure of existence, the most basic categories that we need to describe and understand the world. Here's the way that Descartes thinks about that. Here's Descartes' ontology. Strictly speaking, in Descartes' ontology, there are three categories that we need to describe the world. First, substance. Second, attribute. And third, mode or accident. Substance, attribute, mode. Or accident, as he sometimes says, but let's use mode. What are those things? Well, there are not just three of them. It's also useful to realize that they form a hierarchy. Substance is the most fundamental category, and attribute, in a sense, depends on substance. It doesn't make sense to think about an attribute that is not the attribute of a certain substance. And modes depend on attributes, and therefore also on substances. That at least is sort of the official story. If you think it through, it turns out to be a little bit more complicated, but that is the official story. A substance, we could say, is something that sort of fundamentally exists, that exists in itself, of itself, that doesn't depend on anything else for its existence. A mode is going to turn out to be something that does depend on something else for its existence. And maybe the easiest way to sort of make this point, before we start explaining exactly how Descartes uses it, but maybe the easiest way to explain the difference between a substance and a mode, sort of in general, is by taking a look at something like this pencil. Right? We could be talking about two different things. We could be talking about the pencil, but if we wanted to, we also could be talking about this orange, or yellow, or whatever it looks like on your screen. Let's say yellow. Now, there seems to be a pretty distinct way in which the yellow depends on there being a pencil. Right? I mean, this pencil sort of exists, and it doesn't necessarily need a color for its existence or anything like that. But if there were no pencil, we also couldn't be talking about a yellow, right? Because the yellow is a property of the pencil. And if there is no thing, then there couldn't be any properties of that thing either. Now this brings us very close. I mean, this almost is the distinction between a substance and a mode for Descartes. A substance, one might be tempted to say, is sort of the thing, the underlying existence. And a mode is a certain way of being that kind of thing. A certain way of being that kind of thing. Now this is not going to be maybe precisely pencil and yellow, as I will explain in a second, but that's sort of the abstract way of phrasing it. A substance is sort of the existent, a mode is a way of being that existent. Okay, but what about an attribute? which is supposed to be, in a sense, between the mode and the substance. Well, an attribute for Descartes is the essential sort of nature or property of a particular substance. So I have a substance. That substance is, in a sense, defined by, or it has an essential aspect to it that we can call its attribute. And then there are many ways of being that substance, which are the different modes. Let's try to think this through using two examples, right? And I hope two examples are going to be enough, because in a sense there are only two examples in Descartes' entire philosophy. First example, the substance that we call matter. Matter, Descartes says, is a substance, right? These are things that exist, like materially. Things in the strict sense of the word. Objects. Matter has an essential attribute. That which all matter must be. That which makes matter matter. And that is extension. Like spatial extension. Extension in space. Matter is fundamentally, essentially extended in space. To be matter and to be extended in space are in a sense the same thing. So matter is the substance, and its attribute, its fundamental property, its essence, is to be extended. What is a mode? A mode is a way of being matter. That is, a way of being extended. So for instance, being a pencil is a way of being extended. Being a mug is a way of being extended. Being a dice is a way of being extended, and so on and so forth. Right? If I know that something is extended, there is still the question of how it is extended. What exactly is its form, its shape, its size? That's the mode. So what we could say for Descartes is that the mug is a mode of the substance matter. And in understanding what's going on here, we would need to know that the fundamental attribute of matter is being extended. Okay, that's example 1. Here is example 2. There's another substance for Descartes, which is mind. And the attribute of mind, that which is essential to mind, what makes mind mind, is that it thinks. Right? The attribute of mind is thinking or thought. But of course, this leaves open the question, at any particular time, what is this mind thinking? Or, in other words, in what way is thinking going on here? That would be the question of the mode. How is this thinking? How am I thinking at this moment? Well, I have one or more particular thoughts. And those thoughts, which might be the thought of, ooh, what a beautiful yellow pencil, or the thought of, I really hope my students understand my explanation, or any other kind of thought that I have in my mind. The thought of sort of this desire for tea, or the volition, the decision to actually drink some tea. All of those are modes of thinking. So a thought is a mode, and it depends for its existence on this thinking mind. Okay, so 3 layers: substance, attribute, mode. One question that you could ask Descartes is whether substance and attribute are really different. Right? I mean, I said at some point that substance can exist without attribute, but attribute needs substance. But of course it's not clear that matter could exist without extension, its attribute. Right? These two things seem to be, in a sense, the same. It is what makes this substance. Matter is matter because its attribute is extension. So we can take this hierarchy, especially between between substance and attribute, maybe with a tiny pinch of salt. But for Descartes, the hierarchy between, on the one hand, substance and on the other hand, mode is going to be very important. So Descartes is going to insist that matter is more fundamental than any specific way of being extended, any specific way of being matter. And he's going to insist that mind is more fundamental than any particular thought, right? Any particular way of thinking. Those depend on mind for their existence. One slightly difficult question here is how many substances there are for Descartes. Well, in one sense it's easy. There are for Descartes exactly 3 substances: matter, mind, and God, the infinite substance who we will talk about a little bit later. Matter, mind, and God. But sometimes Descartes talks as if, even a mug is in a sense a substance. That would be the traditional way of talking. That would be the way that Aristotle talks about substances. So sometimes he seems to vacillate a little bit in how he speaks as to whether there is one substance, matter, or whether we live in a world of material substances. Now I think within Descartes' way of thinking, the former way of speaking is better. And so I think it would be best for us, at least, to think of Descartes as saying that there is one substance, matter, and all the objects around us are merely modes of that substance. Things are a little bit more complicated, though, when it comes to mind, right? I mean, clearly there's mind, and then there are different thoughts, which all belong to this one single mind, my mind. But already in saying that, my mind, I am suggesting that there are lots of minds, right? Your minds of all the rational creatures in the universe. And so there, it kind of does seem as if there are many minds, right? And not just one substance called mind, but many minds. As far as I know, this is not a question that Descartes sort of confronts head on, right? Is there one substance, mind, and somehow all our thoughts are inherent in that substance? Or are there many substances, minds, plural? And if so, how could that possibly work? And how are they different from each other? And so on and so forth. As far as I know, Descartes doesn't really confront that question head on. Okay, I mean, we can worry about that if we want to, but we don't need to worry about that in order to understand what's happening here in the Meditations. So, mind, matter, substance, mode, those are some of the most important terms here. But in the third meditation, Descartes is going to going to use, these are existing terms for him, he's going to use another terminology, which is very important for understanding what's going on, but which is, I would say, particularly obscure for us, because these are terms that we really don't use anymore in our ways of thinking. And that is when Descartes talks about different levels of reality. So in the Meditations, Descartes is going to make a distinction between formal reality and objective reality. Formal reality and objective reality. And I should add to that immediately, and this is going to be one of the very, very few times, maybe even the only time, when I'm going to really talk about issues of translation. I should say immediately that these terms are translated in different ways by different translators. Formal and objective reality are the most common translations. I think they sort of fit the original Latin, sort of literally. But the text that I put on Brightspace, so the text in the Ontology, uses formal and objective reality, but the translation that I linked to on Brightspace uses a different terminology. It talks about intrinsic and representative reality. Formal reality would be the same as intrinsic reality, And objective reality would be the same as representative reality. Now, I think the intrinsic representative translation has the positive feature of being more clear. Intrinsic and representative. That's really, in a sense, going to be what this is about. Formal versus objective has the advantage of being the terms that everybody has been using in talking about Descartes for the past couple of hundred years. That's a difficult, I mean, which of these two to prefer, right? I'm going to use the sort of the standard translations, formal and objective, but I want you to know what's going on here. Okay, so what is formal reality or intrinsic reality? Well, formal reality is, for Descartes, the reality that something has by existing. As existing, you need a certain amount of reality. And this amount that Descartes talks about, that's kind of weird, right? An amount of reality. Normally we would say that something is real or it's not real, right? I mean, this pen is real and Sherlock Holmes is not real. And it's not the case that if more Sherlock Holmes books get written, he becomes a little bit more real or something like that. So we normally think of reality as something that you have or don't have, and it doesn't really have gradations. Well, Descartes would sort of agree with that in general, but he thinks that it makes sense to talk about levels of reality when we think of this original ontological hierarchy. If we think of modes and substances, then Descartes says it's clear that a substance has more reality than a mode, because a mode is just a way of being that substance, and so a mode really depends on the substance in a way that the substance doesn't depend on the mode. And so Descartes thinks that substances are, in a very specific sense, more real than modes. Okay, so this is Descartes' idea. Substances have a different level of reality than modes. So, when we talk about the reality that something has intrinsically, formally, this formal reality is just a reality of its ontological category, right? A substance has the reality of substance, and a mode has the reality of mode, which is lower than the reality of substance. But now Descartes is going to add another way of thinking about reality, another way of ascribing reality to something, which applies not to everything, which applies only to ideas. Right? Ideas. What were ideas? Ideas are thoughts. They are a particular kind of thought. They are the kind of thought that presents something or represents something. Like the idea of a cow. Right? The idea of a cow represents a cow. Right? Yeah, it represents a cow. So ideas have content. Right? That's what we could say. Ideas have content. Objective reality, or representative reality, which really gets out that we're talking about the representation now, is the reality of that which is represented by an idea. And so it turns out that ideas, really uniquely among all things in the world, because it's only ideas that really present or represent things to us, we can talk about two kinds of reality of them. Ideas have a particular formal or intrinsic reality, namely the reality of a mode. Right? An idea is a thought, and a thought is a way of being mind, and so a thought is a mode, as we already saw. Every idea, no matter what it is the idea of, has the intrinsic or formal reality of a mode. That's just what an idea is. But Descartes now says, when we check out our ideas, we can see that they can be of different things, right? And some of those things are going to be modes, and others are going to be substances, right? If I think about matter, I have an idea of a substance. And that has more objective reality than the idea of a mode. right? When I think of being circular, I'm just thinking of a mode. And so I represent less reality, or I have less objective reality if I'm an idea that represents a mode than when I'm an idea that represents a substance like matter. So here's the way that Descartes comes to an idea. He says, hey, an idea has two kinds of reality. Its formal reality is always the reality of a mode. But its objective or representative reality is the reality of whatever it is the idea of. An idea of a mode has the objective reality of a mode. An idea of a substance has the objective reality of a substance. This is going to be very important for Descartes, because it is going to be the fundamental idea underlying his proof of the existence of God. Now, when we come to the proof of the existence of God, we're going to find out that there is, in fact, another step in the ontological hierarchy, which we didn't talk about until now, which is that there is a distinction between two kinds of substances. Descartes is going to tell us that there are finite substances and infinite substances, or rather, one infinite substance, God. Finite substances depend, Descartes would say, for their reality on an infinite substance, which exists in and of itself, which has created the entire world, and so on and so forth. We don't know that now at this point in the meditations, but we are going to find out that we have the idea of an infinite substance, of this ultimate perfection that depends on nothing else. And so really the hierarchy of levels of reality is going to encompass three things. There are modes, there are finite substances, and there's going to be infinite substance. We'll see how Descartes uses that in his proof of the existence of God very soon.